Is meritocracy just? Michael Sandel has written a wonderful book, The Tyranny of Merit. The tyranny of merit. How could merit lead to tyranny? Isn't merit a good thing?
Thank you for the question, Anna, and what a pleasure it is to be with you in this conversation about meritocracy. Merit is generally a good thing. If I need surgery, I want a well-qualified surgeon to perform it, that's merit. So how can merit become a kind of tyranny? And moreover, a kind of tyranny that it seems to me explains a lot that's gone wrong with our civic life. To see how this happened, we need to look back over the past 4 or 5 decades. The divide between winners and losers has been deepening, poisoning our politics, setting us apart. This has partly to do with the widening inequalities of income and wealth during the age of globalization. But it's not only that. It has also to do with the changing attitudes towards success that have accompanied the widening inequalities. Those who've landed on top have come to believe that their success was their own doing, the measure of their merit, and that they therefore deserved the full bounty that the market bestowed upon them, and by implication, that those who struggle, those left behind, must deserve their fate too. Now, this harsh way of thinking about success arises from a seemingly attractive ideal, the principle of meritocracy. The principle that says, insofar as chances are equal, the winners deserve their winnings. Now, we know that in practice, chances are not equal. Children born poor tend to stay poor as adults. It's true that we tell ourselves a comforting story that in America, we don't need to worry so much about inequality as they do in old world Europe, because here we have the American dream. It's always possible to rise. No one is consigned to the fate of their birth. But it's not so easy to rise. A study was done comparing countries, advanced democracies, in chances for upward mobility. And they asked, how many generations would it take at current rates of intergenerational mobility for someone born poor, bottom 10%, to rise not to the top, but to the middle, to the median income? In Denmark, it takes 2 generations. How many generations do people think it takes in the United States? Just call out a number.
7.
Well, 5 it is. Yeah. 5 generations. So you might say that the American dream is alive and well and living in Copenhagen. It's not, there are other measures of the difficulty of rising, that we don't live up to the meritocratic principles we profess. At Ivy League universities, like the ones at which we teach, they have generous financial aid policies. At Harvard and Stanford now, if your family makes less than $200,000 a year, you attend, if you're admitted, tuition free. $100,000 or less, and it's tuition free plus room, board, books, and other expenses. Despite these generous financial aid policies, though, there are more students in these places who come from families in the top 1% than there are students who come from the bottom half of the country combined. So it's certainly true we don't live up to the meritocratic principles we aspire to. And from this, you might conclude that the problem with meritocracy is simply that we don't live up to it. We need to perfect the meritocracy. We need to create truly equal chances for success. But is that the only problem with meritocracy? And to test, I'd like to put this question really to our audience. Is that all right? May I do?
They're in for a treat.
If people are ready. Think of the image of a race. What is a fair race? Well, a race where everyone starts at the same starting line. But everybody knows that that isn't enough to make the race fair, because if some people arrive at that starting line without having had access to good running shoes or training with good coaches or good nutrition, then the race isn't even fair, even though it starts from the same line. So here's the question I'd like to put to the group. Suppose we could perfect the meritocracy by creating truly fair equality of opportunity, so that everyone really started the race with the same background advantages, regardless of the family from which they came. If we could somehow, someday, bring about such a race or such a society, then would you conclude that the winners of that race deserve the winnings? And let's begin by taking a vote on that question, see what people think. How many would say, no, even that race, even of that race, it could not be said that the winners deserve their winnings? How many say no? And how many say yes? That would be a truly fair race, and the winners would deserve. So we have a pretty good division of opinion. And we also have microphones. So let's hear first from someone who, how did you vote?
I voted that it would be a fair race.
Okay.
But I think you're asking a question about a race. And a race, the whole idea...
Let's please get a microphone to you. And tell us your name.
Hi, I'm Joni Fabry.
Yeah.
The whole idea of a race is that someone will pull ahead,
yes,
and some may fall back. Why else bother with a race? So a race is a way of sifting
yes,
through various talents or strengths.
Yes.
It's not to say that everyone shouldn't have as in society as fair a beginning
right,
as possible, but people naturally will have different strengths and abilities and interests and whatnot.
Okay, so people, even if there is fair equality of opportunity, just keep it there for a moment. I want to make sure I've got this right. Even then, because of people's different talents and abilities and gifts, everybody's not going to cross the finish line at the same time, right? And therefore, you conclude that those who do cross, the person who does cross first, does or doesn't deserve the winnings?
Or
the prize,
win.
the gold medal.
If
the
medals
Olympics
are being given out, yeah, they deserve.
They deserve it.
Yeah.
But it's predictable, you're suggesting, who that's going to be, more or less. If it's Usain Bolt, the fastest runner in the world, and me, and I have the same great running shoes and the same great coaching and nutrition and so on, he's still going to win.
Right.
And
But
he deserves...
But he couldn't write that book on meritocracy, you know?
Okay. Thank you for that word of consolation. Who would say that the winner of this race does deserve? Who voted yes? They do deserve. Yeah. Tell us why. Tell us your name and tell us why.
Hi, my name is Asha, and I do believe that if everybody started from, sort of an equal line, that there will be winners and not so winners, and those who win deserve the win, very much so. Why not? I don't understand.
Well, just to build on the argument we already heard, let me put it to you in a sharper version. The reason why not, so the argument could be raised, is if Usain Bolt always wins the race with me, not because he practices more. Let's say I practice just as much, even more than he does. But he's a more gifted athlete than I am. He's just faster.
Right.
But that's not his doing, is it? The effort is his doing. The training is his doing. But I also train. Is it his doing, or is it his good luck that he's a gifted athlete and therefore able to win the gold?
Agree that it's his good luck that he was born with, some gifts and talents.
Yeah.
And so he beats you at it. But still, again, we can't hold that against him. Sure, if it was his luck, but isn't that what we all sort of know, and what don't we applaud when we see the fastest runner or somebody who is the best basketball player or a mathematician? Don't we?
Yeah.
I mean, why not celebrate that person's success?
Well, we celebrate it, but you would go a step further, would you, and say, and he deserves it?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's test this. Is there someone who disagrees who would like to offer a reason? Yes. The person in the corner over here. We'll get you a microphone.
I'll reinforce that I took his class in 1987, so was trained on this answer. I disagree, even as much as I want to celebrate a Usain Bolt,
Right.
because luck is not evenly distributed. Talent is not evenly distributed. And as much as we want to set the social conditions, fairness, training, et cetera, the talents that are within us are not our choosing. And so there has to be a degree of humility, and I would also argue an acceptance that the world is unfair. No. And we can't totally address the unfairness, but we should have humility that leads us to worry about others.
And so the humility arises, wait, hold on to the microphone for a minute, if you would. The humility arises from the recognition that the talents and gifts that enable me to succeed are not wholly mine, not my doing, but I'm indebted for them. I should be grateful for them, but I shouldn't regard it as a measure of my deservingness. Do I have it right?
Yeah, I think you have it right.
Okay, all right, so that's the counter argument. I want to hear someone who has a reply to that argument, but I want to now tie it to earnings, to two different results in the economy. Let's first take a school teacher. Think of your most inspiring teacher in school who had the greatest impact on you. You can probably remember the name of that teacher. I can remember. Can you, Anna, remember the name?
I can.
Who was it?
Miss Booker.
Miss Booker. And what did she teach?
French.
French. Mine was Miss O'Brien. She taught history. She was very tough, very conservative woman, very tough, wonderful teacher. All right, you're thinking of that teacher. Now, how much did that teacher make, roughly? Just call out. 20,000? 25,000, 50,000. It would depend, I suppose, where you live, but on average, it might be today around, what, 50,000, would you say? 70,000. In some districts, it may be higher. Now, think of someone who makes quite a bit more money than your best teacher, LeBron James. What does he make? He makes, counting his NBA salary plus endorsements, about $150 million. Think of someone who last year made more than LeBron James, Taylor Swift. How much did she make last year? Well, that was for the whole tour, but she took in there are various estimates, but something like 400 million conservatively estimated. Now, here's the question. Would you say that Taylor Swift deserves to make, what, 5,000 to 10,000 times more than your best school teacher? How many would say yes, she does? And how many say no? Oh, wow. Most people say no, but we have to start with someone, the few brave souls who said yes. Go ahead.
Respectfully, you're comparing apples to kumquats. Taylor Swift in the open market is offering her skills.
Yes.
And no one is forcing them to buy a ticket.
Right.
So she deserves whatever she gets.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And the teacher is underpaid, I would argue.
Yeah.
But somehow society, the school systems and others have placed a value on that. And that's another choice to make as to whether one's going to be a teacher or not.
How much should the school teacher make? You say they're underpaid.
I would say, depending on where they are, they should be making a middle-class salary.
But not 400 million.
Not 400. But no. But
Okay.
see, again, you're distorting it on purpose, I'm sure.
No, I'm asking a question.
They should make a competitive wage in the communities in which they work.
Okay. And then we have someone else who's on your side of the argument. Tom, you voted vigorously. No? All right. All right. So now let's hear from someone who thinks she doesn't deserve to make 5,000 or 10,000 times more than the school teacher. What reply would you give to the argument we've just heard? Yes.
Thank you. Also, shout out to everyone moving the microphones around. I would say that deservingness is an arbitrary concept. And I wouldn't say, maybe putting it as a binary of she does or she doesn't deserve it is us trying to create a definitive meaning where there isn't necessarily one.
Well, but we're trying to think through who deserves what and why. We have to think that through to figure out what counts as a just way of rewarding this or that social role. Is there anyone else who would like to reply to the argument that Taylor Swift offers her services, no one forces them to go to buy a ticket, and so she's popular and she deserves to make that much more? There's somebody toward the back. Stand up and we'll get you a microphone.
It's just the person, not the last person who spoke, but the person before that the measuring rod for deserving was what the market will bear.
Yeah.
That's a choice that we can choose to make or not. And it was stated as if that's just a given.
Right.
There are lots of other ways to measure value or deservingness, not on. And if the fundamental way to measure is what the market will bear, then sure, she deserves what she wants. But I certainly don't want to be I don't want to live my life with that as my measuring rod.
So you don't think that the market is a good way, keep the microphone just for a moment, you don't think that the market is a good way of determining the value of this or that job?
No, I do not. I mean, it depends on what you mean. It's a good way if you want to have an easy way to quantify things.
Right.
But if you want to talk about moral issues or something deeper in the human experience, then I think you have to maybe invoke some other measuring tools.
So if we're concerned, if we're trying to ask the question about the value of a contribution to the economy or to the common good, you think the market is not a good measure of that?
The economy, perhaps. I don't know about the common good, because the common good would involve other things other than,
I see. Okay.
Money.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Now, what we've, I think, learned from this, even this preliminary discussion, is we've glimpsed two possible objections to the meritocratic idea. One is that the gifts and talents that enable some people to get ahead are not their own doing, but their good luck. So it would be a mistake to say, just as we wouldn't say that the winner of the lottery deserved to win, we might say, good for you, congratulations, but we wouldn't say the winner of a lottery if your number came up. We wouldn't say, that's your doing, you did a wonderful job, you deserve it. That wouldn't make any sense. So one argument that we've heard in the name of luck, gift, fortune, is that the talents that enable some people to flourish are their good fortune, not their own doing. And related to that is another kind of luck that came up in some of the responses, which is the fact that Taylor Swift lives at a time and in a society that loves that kind of popular music. That, too, is not her doing. That's her good luck. Or that LeBron lives at a time when people love basketball.
And black people can play.
Yes, yes. If LeBron had lived back in the days of the Italian Renaissance, he might have been as gifted a basketball player as he is now, but he wouldn't have made as much because they didn't care much about basketball back then. They cared more about fresco painters. So that, too, is an accident, a matter of good fortune. Two objections to the fairness of even a perfect meritocracy. But I would like to suggest a third different kind of objection that isn't even about fairness. Meritocracy, or at least this is the idea I'd like to put before our audience, and they can agree or disagree, Anna. Meritocracy has a dark side. And the dark side is that it's corrosive of the common good, even a perfectly realized meritocracy. The reason it's corrosive of the common good is that it cultivates hubris among the winners and humiliation among those left behind. It encourages the successful to see their success as their own doing, especially if it's a perfect meritocracy. Everyone really started at the same starting point with the same advantages as me, and I won. I deserve it. It encourages the successful to inhale too deeply of their own success, to forget the luck and good fortune that helped them on their way, to forget their indebtedness to those who make their achievements possible. And it leads the successful to look down on those less fortunate than themselves. Which brings us to this corrosive feature of meritocratic attitudes towards success, the relation between those attitudes and our current political moment. One of the most potent sources of the populist backlash against elites is the sense among many working people that elites look down on them, don't respect the work they do or the contributions they make, especially well-educated, well-credentialed elites, who many working people feel look down on those without a college degree. This tendency was abetted, inadvertently abetted, by the mainstream politicians and political parties of both parties over the last 4 or 5 decades, who offered the following advice to those facing the outsourcing of jobs and stagnant wages during the age of globalization. What these politicians told us, and we heard these slogans again and again, is that if you're worried about widening inequalities and wage stagnation and being left behind, the solution is for you to go get a college degree. What you earn will depend on what you learn. You remember that slogan? You can make it if you try. If you want to compete and win in the global economy, go to college. Now, what these political parties and politicians missed was the insult implicit in that advice. The insult was this: if you're struggling in the new economy and you didn't get a degree, your failure is your fault. That's the implication. Now, so it's no wonder that many working people, especially those without a college degree, are angry and feel a sense of grievance. And it's a legitimate grievance. Now, not all of the grievances to which Trump appeals are legitimate grievances. Some are ugly. But this one is legitimate. What those of us who spend our days in the company of the credentialed can easily forget is that most of our fellow citizens do not have a four-year college degree. In fact, only about 36% of Americans do, which means that the vast majority do not. So it's folly to have created an economy that sets as a necessary condition of dignified work and a decent life a four-year college degree that most people don't have. That's how meritocracy has become a kind of tyranny. Now, it's a further question, if this diagnosis is plausible, if it rings true at all, what should we do about it? Well, we should do at least a couple of things. First, we should rethink the role of higher education. We devote enormous resources, rightly so, to higher education, but only relatively a pittance to vocational and technical training. About $164 billion federal spending on higher education, about $1.1 billion on vocational and technical training. More than that, we should shift the terms of political discourse away from arming and asking how we can arm people for meritocratic competition, scrambling up a ladder, even as the rungs on that ladder grow further and further apart. Shift from that rhetoric of rising, as I call it, to focus instead on the dignity of work, asking how to make life better for those who make valuable contributions to the economy and to the common good through the work they do, the families they raise, and the communities they serve, whether or not they have a college degree. And finally, we should reconsider the way we regard those of us who've landed on top, the way we regard our own success. This is more than a matter of politics. This also is a matter of moral and spiritual turning. Asking ourselves, is our success really our own doing? Have we lost touch with an awareness of the extent to which we are not only lucky and fortunate, but also indebted for whatever success and achievements we've been able to enjoy? Now, this is only a provisional conclusion. Consider it a provocative one. Anna, you've written a story, more than a story, it's a fable about merit and the complexities of merit and how to identify it. Would you be willing to perform it for us?
Well, I'll read it, won't perform it.
But
And,
with you, I've learned there's not a bright line between the two.
Okay. Well, I just want to say that the story really comes out of a word that this gentleman over here used, which was humility. And I know that, especially in The Tyranny of Merit, you warn us that humility is a civic virtue that we desperately need. and we no longer have. So I want to highlight that. And I wrote this for Michael after he published and it was on the shelf, The Tyranny of Merit. It doesn't really have a title, but he suggested I title it in this way: A Tale of Two Dogs. Part 1. In the land of smoke and mirrors, there is a real hotel, which I will call, and you know this hotel, Hotel Merit Hollywood. Just a quarter block south and a half block west of one of the busiest intersections in all of Southern California, it has the facade of quiet opulence. The semicircular driveway is adorned from around 8 a.m. till dusk with a Lamborghini, a McLaren, and a Bentley. The house car is a Rolls. The entertainment industry movers and shakers do breakfast, lunch, and cocktails there. Breakfast costing, well, then when I wrote this, about $100 for 2 people. Now it's much more, I didn't check. And the shakers don't eat much. They're quite fit. Sprinting up and down the meritocratic ladder is done without breaking much of a sweat, no matter how far apart the rungs are. Harvard, Stanford, Princeton, Yale, et al. Don't always appear on the resumes of the elite here. To be sure, there's a healthy contingent of alums, but the only necessary credential to have a special table at the Hotel Merit poolside is the ability to make money and/or noise, that is, to attract attention. Helps to have a couple movie stars at your stable or pantry for leverage. Those in power at the Merit Hollywood seek to be, Michael, to use words that you've pulled from the liberal speak thesaurus, on the right side of history. One of the most powerful agencies in town, extending to offices in 14 cities and 6 nations, represents the founders, or did, of Black Lives Matter. So here comes the main character of this part of my tale. It was dusk in the parking lot of the Hotel Merit Hollywood. I was waiting for the parking attendant to swing round with my rental car, not a Lamborghini. A standard poodle arrested my breath. She, I think it was a she, was poodle royalty, well-bred. Racehorse legs, not a silly haircut, groomed with taste. Taste. That's a word they throw around at the Merit. Taste. She was obviously well-educated, tutored daily. I didn't sense any hubris. Her intelligence came piercing through a focused gaze. Every ringlet of her thick coat fell as it should. A beautiful jeweled collar, maybe fake jewels, but you never know. It's the land of excess where even a dog's sense of self depends on a little bit of bling. She wouldn't last in a dog park, though. Even if her deep desire was to play with others, I suspect that if her nanny didn't rescue her, she'd escape on her own. She was not bred to cavort. All she was bred for is to look like $1 million. She knew her worth. Part 2. The apartment building, I'll call it the Tudor Downs, is situated in New Haven, where there's Yale and then there's everybody else. The Downs is a beat-up place that's in everybody's part of town. I and my collaborators were boarded there while rehearsing Let Me Down Easy, my 2008 play about resilience and vulnerability, the body versus the healthcare system, the body versus the state, life versus death, winning versus losing. Michael, you know about the play because you were among the people I interviewed and performed in that play. Many who work with me on my plays did, in fact, attend Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Stanford. But they have little hubris, Michael. The lack of hubris, after all, is about money. For example, after doing research on 3 continents, writing several drafts of the play, and being its sole performer, 8 shows a week, no understudy, my compensation in 2008 was $700 a week. plus a small fraction of proceeds from ticket sales. Directors and designers were probably compensated in the same range. Those of us who work in the nonprofit theater aren't there for the money, whereas the salaries of resident artistic and managing directors pre-COVID increased exponentially over the last 3 decades, the salaries of we, the itinerant artists, did not. Those in consistent power, including our unions, I suspect, are banking on an assumption that we, who are skilled performers, directors, writers, designers, assistants, choose to work in nonprofit institutions because we have something burning in our hearts to say, and saying it is pay enough. And then some do buy into the mission statements of these nonprofits, creating community, the betterment of society, perhaps even the common good, etc. So here's the relevant action of this part of my presentation. Memphis, my dog, lived with me for 17 years. But it was not until our 7th year together, during our sojourn at the Tudor Downs, that I learned of her special gifts. The realization, to use your words, Michael, from that interview I did of you in 2007, the realization was unbidden. Memphis had no pedigree. The vet said she was part Australian cattle dog, the other part anybody's guess. She was not educated. That's my fault. She was, like the rest of her breed, or we think breed, smarter than human. She was smarter than me, so even as she showed a great deal of potential at puppy school, I flunked out. And as you know, the owner, or as they sometimes say, the parent, has to get trained as well. With my dismissal from puppy school came hers. A fire alarm went off at the Downs in the middle of the day. Our rooms were on maybe the 18th floor. People I'd never seen, some of them in pajamas, poured out of rooms into hallways and down the stairs. Much to my horror, as we ran down the stairs, Memphis ran back up the many floors. Australian cattle dogs are herders. And her herding DNA revealed itself instantly. Never trained to herd, but she knew the task. She had dignity about the work she was bred to do. No matter how many times I screamed for her to come with me, singular me, her owner, she herded everybody else. Everybody, unknown to her, out of the building with resolve and the utmost purpose. I guess Memphis understood the common good, and it prevailed. I will close with just a few sentences from the 2007 interview I conducted of Michael for my portrait of him in Let Me Down Easy. Quote, "We are using technologies to fit ourselves into the world. We are using technologies to fit ourselves to the world that happens to be. We should change the society to fit us, rather than to try to change our bodies to fit the social roles that could be otherwise. It is a lack of moral imagination." The tyranny of merit raises many important questions. One of my questions is, how much of our instinct towards the common good has been bred out of us? Or is it there? Like Memphis's herding. She was an orphan found on the side of a highway in Tennessee, probably because she proved as a puppy to be gun shy. There are no papers to document her aptitude, but her herding instinct emerged once the need was there. What skill sets do we have that we don't even know about as modern humans? Skill sets we have because we have not practiced, or because we are numb to the needs around us. Have we lost our instinct to protect the common good?
Should I try to answer that last question?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote it for you.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think that at best, our impulse to the common good is in hiding. It's in recession, though not extinguished. I think that there is, even amidst the rancor and the polarization, there is a desire for something better, for a better kind of public discourse than the kind to which we've become accustomed, and for a morally more engaged kind of public discourse. I think that for all the divisions, and the partisan divisions run deep. In fact, one survey found, this was back, I think, in shortly after 2016, that now parents are more upset if their children marry someone of a different partisan allegiance than if they marry outside the faith. It didn't used to be that way. Now, and yet I think there is, across the political spectrum, with the exception maybe of one narrow sector, a yearning for an overcoming of the polarization that enables people to listen to one another and to reason together about big moral questions even across their differences. The question is how we can create the conditions for that. And that's a hard question.
Well, there's just so much noise. There's noise from every direction, not just political noise. There's noise from the entertainment industry. There's noise on social media. And I wonder if there's any space to hear what you call the moral and spiritual turning. I wonder about that. How would we hear it?
You as an artist, Anna, you are steeped in and present to audiences modes of performance, of being, of imagination and reflection that touch on moral and spiritual aspirations. So, if I could reverse the question, what's your sense of it?
Well, I'm looking here at my new friend Saket, whose work with immigrants who go to places after disaster and repair them, including where you grew up, the Pacific Palisades. And he's aware of something that he would say is the crisis of belonging. And so I think one place we could try to hear is in the environment where people are humble enough to know that we're in a crisis of belonging. And maybe one question is, how could we mobilize them? I mean, we know that Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General, says that we have an epidemic of loneliness. How do we can we use the crisis of belongingness to try to bring a message that's about a moral turning, or a message about goodness at all?
Yeah. Well, goodness, and it would have to be about
you're talking about a common good.
Yes,
right?
the common good. The common good is that part of goodness that touches on our civic lives and that draws from it. I think that creating the conditions to enable people to emerge from the crisis of loneliness and to connect it with a public project rather than to regard it as an individual private malaise.
Psychological.
Yes.
Yeah.
A purely psychological interpretation of loneliness misses the necessary conditions, public conditions, civic conditions. One of the most corrosive effects of the inequalities of recent decades is that those who are affluent and those who are of modest means increasingly live separate lives. We live and work and shop and play in different places. We send our kids to different schools. And the effect of this isolation is that people from different classes and different ethnic, racial, and religious backgrounds rarely encounter one another in the course of the day. Democracy doesn't require perfect equality, but it does require that there be public places and common spaces, class-mixing institutions that bring people together not to have a debate or a discussion even, but just in the ordinary course of the day, in a sports stadium, for example, or in a municipal...
Well, you talk about the skyboxification, though.
Yes. Well,
in our sports arenas.
We've had the skyboxification of sports arenas with the luxury VIP boxes and the common folk in the stands below. And even those seats are pretty expensive these days. Down in the bleachers, they're pretty expensive. But we somehow have to... We talk about public infrastructure. We think about bridges and roads and airports. But we also need to attend to the civic infrastructure of a shared democratic life. And that means rebuilding public places and common spaces like municipal swimming pools, public schools, public transportation, public libraries, municipal recreational centers, public parks, so that in the ordinary course of our lives, we bump up against one another, because this is how we learn in concrete, practical ways to negotiate and to abide our differences, and this is how we come to care for the common good. And so I think, now the arts can be a convening venue for this as well. Arts, sports, recreation, cultural centers, transportation. There's been a great hollowing out not only of moral discourse, but also of the public realm itself.
You know, the late Lonnie Guinier used to say that in part that was because the word public had become racialized. So people weren't interested in the public, right? But you and I both know that if you want a really great swimming pool, you know, that is, you're going to go to a public pool if you want a nice big swimming pool. But I know we're going to be winding down, and I just want to bring up one other thing with you, Michael, that flows over into, I know, a panel I'm doing tomorrow, and I suspect there'll be many more. And as you talk about the loss of the dignity of work in so much of what you do, what about AI? Say something about how you think that will affect the dignity of work.
It threatens the dignity of work. It threatens the existence of work for a great many people. And the danger, I think, is that the most robust techno-optimists in Silicon Valley are telling us that robots will come for our jobs, and we better find an alternative to work. And some of them propose a universal basic income, which on the face of it seems generous and could be a good idea, provided it supplements rather than replaces other aspects of the safety net. But a vision of a universal basic income is a way of easing the way to a world without work, because that's the big ambition. That's essentially a way of paying people off to cede work to machines, to robots. And I think that's very dangerous, generous though it seems on the face of it, because the fundamental human need is the need to be needed by one's fellow citizens.
Purpose.
And to be able to work at something, paid or unpaid, that meets those needs. And without that, life lacks meaning and purpose. That's the danger.
You get the last word.
Well, we've, in a way, only just begun. But I want to go back to an idea that you emphasized, Anna, and that came up in the discussion, the idea of humility, which in a way is a distant virtue. And why is that the case? It brings us back to the meritocratic conviction that people deserve whatever riches the market bestows on their talents. That belief makes community and solidarity an almost impossible project. Because why do the successful owe anything to the less advantaged members of society? The answer to this depends on recognizing that for all our striving, we are not self-made and self-sufficient. Finding ourselves in a society that prizes our assets and talents, that's our good luck, not our due. A lively sense of the role of luck in life and of our indebtedness, that can prompt a certain humility. The humility that enables us to say, looking upon someone who's struggling, there, but for the accident of birth, or the grace of God, or the mystery of fate, go I. That could be me. This is the spirit of humility we need now. It's not only a personal virtue, it's also a civic virtue. Perhaps humility as a civic virtue could be the beginning of a way back from the harsh ethic of success
So we need
that sets us apart.
leaders who emanate that humility.
Well,
In every level.
We need-
even teachers, you know,
we
at every
do need
level.
we do need leaders and teachers, and we need the kind of critical self-reflection that opens us to the luck and good fortune on which our success, our achievements, and our merit are due.